Welcome to Old Path and our study through the New Testament we do here on Thursdays. We are currently in the book of Matthew, chapter 10, and we'll be turning there in just a moment. But I have a couple of things that I'll want to go through, if I could, real quick, just to let you know about what we'll do at the end of the study as we go through and look at various topical things. Actually, right now, currently, there is a meeting that's going on in Davos, Switzerland, or has been over the last few days. And it's the interesting thing, if you're not familiar with it, the World Economic Forum meets there this time of year, every year. And all the world leaders show up there, and it's an interesting time to be alive, let's put it that way. And there's a lot of turmoil in the world. And so as I'm kind of looking through it, I just realized how broken this world actually is. And the question that always comes up when people start talking about this, actually you can usually see what kind of a view the person that you're talking with has. If they think that there's some kind of way to fix it, and if this scenario happened in that scenario, and so I kind of wanted to talk about that. Is the world broken, or is it irreparably broken? And how is that a biblical topic that we should be talking about? So I want to look at that as we conclude today. And then the second thing to mention is about our Israel trip. And I think I mentioned this on our last study Monday, that we have had a change in the pricing of it, and the price has come down a little bit. The full cost of the trip doesn't need to be paid for until the middle of next month, but we need to get registrations in. So again, if you're thinking about going, don't procrastinate. Get in touch with me. oldpaththeology.net is the website, and you can contact me through the Contact Us page that's there, and I'd love to talk to you directly about it. I will talk with you by phone just to give you the details about it and let you know how we're getting there and all the rest. And the long and the short of it, I won't be doing a trip at the end of this year. It's going to be way too busy in Israel, and I don't want to get bogged down in the crowds, and I don't have anything planned for 2027. So unless you're hoping that we do something in 2028, or you're going to go with someone else, this would be the window to do it without the big crowds. I don't think that it's going to be all that busy yet in the springtime, and from the people I'm talking to there, that appears to be the case because people haven't been able to put together a trip that fast. So I'd love to have you go with us. If you have any questions or reasons why you might not want to go, I know some people are concerned about security matters. We were just there in October into November of 2025. There was nothing to be concerned about there. We never felt under threat, and there's nothing that has changed since. So again, this will, I think, be my 8th trip, I believe, there, and I've become quite familiar with it and wouldn't dare go if I thought that there was going to be some kind of a problem. So I think it's a good time for us to go, and we'd love to have you with us, but I do need to at least talk with you and get you up to speed on timetable and paying for it and all the rest of that. So I'd love to give you the information. Hopefully you are able to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to go over those details with you. So turning to Matthew chapter 10, there's something that I want to address, because you'll hear me say it quite often, that when we start to look through passages in the Bible, it's very easy to just get used to reading the Bible, and then the next thing that we do, we read a verse or two, and then we instantly put ourselves into it. And what does it mean to me? How does this apply? And it becomes, of course, we want to know, how is it relevant to me as the believer? That's a good thing for us to do. I don't have a problem with that. It's best, though, for us to fully understand, what does it mean to the original recipient of it, and then what happens when we read it and we understand it. Because yes, there is absolute application to this. No question about it. We've probably heard sermons on portions of this. But I want to be really, really careful to understand who he's talking to here and how it would sound a little different to their ears. And remember that he has already done this. The first part, he's sending them out as sheep among wolves. That's a big deal. So we start to hear this idea of acceptance and rejection that he's going to be speaking about here. So let's back up for just a moment and let's talk about the idea of apostles and disciples and teachers and rabbis and servants and masters and all the rest of that. Because it's easy for us to sometimes lose track of just what it was like for the original hearers of this and who Jesus was and what he represented to them. Because let's remember, he has not really at this point talked heavily about the cross yet, but that time is coming. and he will be discussing that with them in not too distant future. Certainly by this time he hasn't gone to the cross, obviously, and the opposition that he's had has not necessarily been so much up in Jerusalem, but it's been more in around the Galilee and people questioning him and all the rest. So it's still pretty early on as far as that's concerned. So what he would represent to them in a very Jewish mentality, and they're going to start to call him this later on in his ministry. Thus far, they have not used the term teacher, master, rabbi. They haven't started to address him like that, but that's clearly what he is. A rabbi would simply be the person that is the master, teacher, whatever you want to call him, but the people who would be following him around, we would call them disciples, and some call them apostles, and basically they're both. So we think of the apostles as the 12, okay, but they're also disciples of his. They just happen to be the ones that he was sending out to the groups. So he sends them out, which is what apostle means. And so we looked at that, I think, last week, apostolos, which is the idea of being one sent out, and the apo is the one who is sending them out. So an apostle, as a person would look at them, they would say, those are the people that Jesus has sent out. That's an apostle. And so these would be people because they are disciples of Jesus. He's their teacher. They're the one that he's the one that they follow, and they follow his teachings, they follow what he does, and they're devoted to him. So when we hear disciples in our current day, we are all disciples of Jesus Christ. No question about it. And it may very well be that we look at people who are teachers in our world today, and they have that same kind of position as being somebody who's kind of a teacher to them, or somebody that they would say, I'm kind of a disciple of the teaching that's from that particular person. That in and of itself is not a dangerous thing if that person is not drawing people to himself, but rather that's the person that God uses to minister to the people because they're ultimately his disciples. They are his flock. He has given people to be overseers, and if they're doing as he's asked them to do and they're not in the place of being abusive, so all the caveats that people could put out there, okay, great, I'll stipulate to that. But the idea that you would have people that you would look at and think of as being the one that you follow what it is that they teach, really at this point, pastors in this world are only going to be passing along what's already there. So people might like the way that a person presents something. They might like the way that things are phrased. They might like that it doesn't seem so necessarily clinical, though other people might like that. They might like to sit in a Bible study that sounds like it's at a college level and it's very highbrow, and other ones that are, they prefer something that's a lot more simple and really not very heavily in depth. You have all points in between. So what people kind of like. So anyway, they might look to that particular person as the one that's their go-to or among their go-to teachers. So anyway, in this case, when we see Jesus, he's sending out his disciples. And the people that are there listening to him because he is their teacher, he's their rabbi, he's their person that they would look to as master, and he's going to use that kind of terminology here. So it's very, very understandable who they are and how he views them and how they should view themselves. Because he's talking about sending them out. That's the context. We studied it in our last study together. So this is not like he's picking up on a new topic. He's just continuing on with what he has said. This is all done in preparation. He's sending them out. This is what they're going to encounter, and they need to be prepared for it. So this is where, whenever we read or whenever we hear Bible studies on this, it's good if the teacher will go ahead, whoever's teaching the Bible study will actually say, let's deal with the history of this first. This is the first time that he has sent them out. This is right after he has said, look at the harvest, and so pray that the Lord of the harvest would send laborers out into the field. And he instantly turns to them at the beginning of the chapter and says, now I am sending you out. And I'm sending you out as sheep among the wolves. So it's not going to be easy. It can be sometimes very trying and very difficult. And he's picking up on that. There's a cost to discipleship for them. And so anytime that we might think, yeah, there's a cost to discipleship for us too. Walk a mile in their shoes. These men were put to death for it. And so many of them were treated very, very poorly before they were even killed. Some of them went through just almost unimaginable difficulty and died horribly. So it cost them greatly. That's why it's always good for us to remember this and not to minimize it, remembering who's the first recipient of this. And it's not even that it's a letter that was written. These are the guys who are hearing it with their own ears as Jesus says these things to them. So that's our context. That's how we are able to prepare ourselves for what we read next is based on the things that he says to them. So here's what I want to do. We're going to read the passage that runs through the end of the chapter, and then you're going to notice that he goes through a number of different little elements in what he is saying here. The big picture, I'm sending you out, my disciples, the ones that I send, and there's going to be an interaction. Some people are going to accept, some are not going to. Remember, he's already said that before. If you go into a city or a town or a house or whatever and they accept you and they're on board with what you're doing, then great, let your peace be there. If you go in thinking it's okay and they turn out not to in any way want anything to do with you, then you make sure as a testimony, wipe the dust off your feet as you go. We looked at the other gospel, I think it was Luke, where it says, and if you do that, then just wipe off the dust from your feet as a testimony against them and remind them that the kingdom of God has come near to them. But they have been in that place of rejection. He's going to pick up a little bit on that. So let's turn to Matthew. We're going to pick up at verse 24, and let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll read through the text, and I want to take it and break it down bit by bit. Father, we thank you once again for the privilege that it is to sit at your feet. We would pray that you would give us understanding. As just even thinking, the idea of sitting at your feet and at the feet of Jesus, to hear from him, these are his words. What would it mean to us here, these 20 centuries later, and all the time that has transpired, and what does it mean in these days? We pray, Lord, that you would give us attentive ears and hearts and minds to listen to the things that are said, and that we would be grown in our relationship, that we would grow in our relationship with you as we hear your word. So we give you all thanks and praise and ask by the Holy Spirit that these bits that we read would become understandable to our ears. We ask it all in Jesus' name. All right. So verse 24 is where we pick up, and you're going to notice that there's the overall theme of this, and it's the idea of being sent out. So that's the biggest of the big parts of this as far as the topic is concerned. But he's going to go through little elementary things of just that bigger, larger context. So he says this, a disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher and a servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call those of his household? Therefore, do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak it in the light. And whatever you hear in the ear, preach it from the housetops. Do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who has the ability to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for 1 copper coin? And not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore, you are more valuable than many sparrows. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him will I confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I am come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow me daily is not worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it, and if he who loses his life for my sake will find it. He who receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward, and he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones a cup of water, cold water, in the name of a disciple, assuredly, I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. So if you're looking at this, you just realize Jesus, since we know the context that he's sending them out, this is really all being said in preparation before they go. It's not just, okay, we need laborers to go out and tell the message, so go on out. If he did that without telling them what they're going to encounter, or at least having them size it up, hey, there's going to be potentially a cost to this. And it's not just potentially, this is really telling them you're going to have resistance, and it's going to grow as their time with him grows. The more that he gets on the radar of the likely suspects of the religious leaders, it's going to put them in the exact same position. And we know that that happened by reading the book of Acts in the early chapters. That's precisely what happened. So he's preparing them not just for the first time that they're sent out, but this will end up going down through the ages. And that's when we're able to pick it up and make application to our own lives and our own understanding. So the first couple of verses of this is kind of the teacher versus the disciple, and I've looked at that a little bit. So the idea of rabbi, teacher, master, different things that are used of him, there is the person, Jesus in this case, that they look to. They look to him for what he does, for what he says, what he teaches, how he conducts himself, all of those things. So if you want to get a good glimpse of this, go ahead and read John's first epistle, the opening part of it, because he talks about Jesus, the one that they had looked upon. They listened to the things that he said. They've actually handled him. He's a real live person. He's been there with them the whole time. And John gives that little bit of a description. We heard the things that he said. We watched him. We observed everything that he did. He's a real live person. We were there. And now we're here to tell you about him, that there's life in him, and there's really life nowhere else. So that's the upshot of the opening of 1 John and really the entirety of the book. So there are those who heard his words here, the very first of his audience, who continued on with him through his earthly ministry, and they're the ones who led the church in the early years, and you have their writings. And this is one of them. This was a man writing this down who was actually among the group that's hearing this. So he's already given that testimony at the beginning of it. These are the people that were there. And so Matthew includes himself in that list. So as we read in verse 24, it says, a disciple is not above or greater than his teacher, nor is a servant above his master. And when you see servant there, it's the word doulos in the Greek. And you can have a person that was a servant or a slave or whatever term you want to use that could have been purchased for that task. A doulos is a different matter altogether. A person is, in this case, bondservant, or a doulos is a person who has given of themselves voluntarily to the service of another. So in this case, they're not unwilling. These are people who willingly have put aside everything else, and they've devoted themselves and given themselves to Jesus, the one who is their teacher, the one who is their leader, their rabbi, their master, whatever term you want to use. So it is this understanding that he has this place of the superior position, and the people who serve him do so voluntarily. So all of the things that are said here is supposed to make them understand. Now again, remember he's saying this, and it is for them to realize who are they in this situation. It's obvious, but he's not ordering them around. He's saying this all. These are men who have followed him by invitation. And so he makes them understand that. I didn't take you. I didn't make you do these things. You're the doulos. I'm the one who is the person that you serve. And yet, if you notice, there are other places where Jesus says, I didn't come here to be served, but to serve. So if you notice, they didn't walk around catering to him all the time. They were the ones who labored alongside of him in preparation for when he would be taken from them, and they would continue that work because they were indebted to him, as are all of us. We should all be in that place of being able to say, I'm doulos, I am servant to him, I am obligated to him, I have willfully given myself to his service because he's worthy of that service. He gave himself for me. I give myself to him in return. So doulos, the bondservant, the slave, the servant-master kind of a relationship. Now, before we go on, let's look at one thing, because it's really, really interesting that we look at this from John 15. And we've read this not long ago, maybe it was even last week, but good for our reminder now, because Jesus talks about this. He doesn't call us servants any longer. And again, he's talked about this, a servant's no greater than his master. We know that from John as well. But no longer do I call you servants in John 15:15. So I don't call you servants any longer, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. And so that recognition that by the time that they're in the upper room, and he is just simply hours away from his arrest and the beginning of his trial and ultimately of his crucifixion, he wants them to realize that yes, they will still be his servants, but they're not the normal servant like you would think, because a person that's a servant and slave, a slave and master kind of a situation, the servant doesn't have any access to the master other than do this and do it now, and there's really no dialogue that's there. In this case, here Jesus says, I don't even consider you in that same way, though you are. You've given yourself voluntarily to me, and you're the doulos, yet I want you to understand that our relationship as servant and master is one of friendship now. And so that idea that I call you friends, and here's the evidence, everything that my Father's told me, I told you. You know the things that you need to know, and servants don't need to know things. You guys do. So that relationship is changed from these first words. It was still the same then, but what he's referring to them and making sure that they understand there's a growth in their relationship with him, and this is pretty obviously demonstrating that. So back to Matthew. It is an amazing thing that Jesus says here, and it should never be taken lightly, that he says this to them, and there is a crossover and an application to us. That relationship that there is, that we, the disciples of Jesus, he is our teacher. We're the people who are devoted to him, and we follow him and his teachings. He's the one who reveals to us what it is that we believe. So he's the first. And then there are others who came after him, those who were with him and wrote, and that just helps us to fill out much more of what we know about what's expected of us as disciples, as believers, as servants, doulos of the Lord Jesus. Okay? So that's where we have kind of common ground with these men, though the things that are said to them, some of it will never really be seen by our eyes. We'll never have to go through some of the stuff that they did. Other times you could say, yeah, we've endured that as well. So nothing's changed in 2,000 years. And so we'll see that as we get through it. But verses 24 and 25 is really the teacher-disciple relationship. So a disciple is not above or greater than his teacher, nor is a servant above his master. It is enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher. We don't aspire to anything greater. It's appropriate that if we're going to call ourselves his disciples, we don't exceed him in any particular way. The best that could ever be said of us is that you are a Christian, you are Christ-like, not in your power and your authority, but because you're like him. That idea of gentleness and meekness and respect and all the different things that we know that are hallmarks of the Christian walk, those things. He was that, so are we, are supposed to be. And there's nothing greater to aspire to than if somebody would say they were with Jesus. We can tell that they're believers. We just have to look at them, hear the things that they say, and hear how they act when they're in just walking through the world. So it is enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher, and a servant like his master. If they called the master of the house Beelzebub, then how much more will they also call those of his household? So guys, realize that this is going to be the case. They are going to increasingly hate me. That will be one of the things that they will say of Jesus, that as he's casting out demons, his religious detractors, the hierarchy in the Jewish religious sects that were there, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, those kind of guys, they were the ones who said, well, you're just able to cast out demons because they're subject to you. You cast them out by the name of Beelzebub. And so his point is, let's dispense with Beelzebub. Let's just call him who he is. So Jesus basically says, explain to me why Satan would cast out demons if that's the case, because a house divided against itself is never going to fall. How is it that you would think that somehow I would cast out those who are supposed to be helpful to me? He points out the ridiculousness of their statement. But again, that's just the religious leaders looking for a way to explain away by some other means something that is easily seen by everyone else. And so his point is, even if he could get them to quit saying that he casts out demons by the Lord of the Flies, Beelzebub, his point is, if they're going to hate me to that degree, they will hate you as well. The statement that he casts out demons by Beelzebub is just a reflection on who they are and what it is that they believe. And if they believe that about me, they're going to believe it about you too. So, disciples, there's a cost. I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. These are the ones that are going to blame you for everything and say that you're just doing what you're doing by some demonic authority. That's what's being spoken of here. So as they're hearing this, again, this is one of those things where you just go, I wonder what this would have sounded like in the ears of the guys that are hearing it for the first time. Now in verses 26 to 28, what will you fear? Is that a fearful thing to you, that they would say that you're casting out demons and you're going to have opposition from those guys? So he gets to that portion of his thought. Therefore, don't fear those people. Who? The ones that say, well, you're just doing what you're doing by a demonic authority, Beelzebub in this case. Well, he says, therefore, don't fear them, for there is nothing that is covered that will not be revealed, and nothing hidden that will not be known. So they have their ulterior motives. You can be kind of sucked into being afraid of them here and now, but in the end of all things, God's going to illustrate everybody who they were for, who they were against, why were they doing what they were doing. It's all going to be revealed. So we can make sometimes initial decisions based on the here and now. His point is, don't get sucked into worrying about the here and now. Everything will be seen eventually. Now, sometimes that stuff will manifest very much immediately, and the hearts of these guys that he's speaking about, though they haven't necessarily encountered them to large measure, the day will come when their hearts are going to be manifest. And so this is really kind of what that's about. This whole section here is about how Jesus will by us believing in him, he was able to get people to manifest their hearts. No question about it. And so it is from that time forward, anybody who would claim him as Lord is going to be at that same place of being ridiculed by those that can't stand the message. They hated Jesus, they're going to hate him too. And he said this to the disciples a number of times. The very simple thing that we do after that is to say, okay, we understand that it applies to them. Would it also apply to us? And the obvious answer is yes, because Jesus is the common denominator between us and the men of 2,000 years ago. It's still Jesus who really does incite in man's mind that reaction. And so again, you've heard me say it. You can talk about Christ all you want to. You start mentioning the name Jesus around people and they get nervous. You'll change the temperature in the room as far as I'm concerned. I know I've said that a number of times, but you walk into a room, you can talk about anything that you want to, and very seldom are people going to get upset by whatever topic you're talking about, unless it's so unbelievably cringy, but you know what I mean. Normal conversation is not going to bother anyone. You start preaching Jesus to a bunch of people and that room is going to change. So, kind of the same thing that he's getting at here. So he says, therefore, don't fear them, because there's nothing that's going on, nothing will be in the here and now that won't all be seen eventually. Therefore, says, so because of that, whatever I tell you in the dark, you speak in the light. So again, it's not being afraid of them. And as I have said things, I want them to be known. And they're going to reveal a lot of things. They're going to reveal people's hearts, their motivations, their temptations, whatever it may be. And so Jesus says, the things that I'm teaching you, I'm not asking you to hold it to yourself, which is kind of interesting when you stop to think about it. There are people that talk all the time about the secret societies that we have in our world today and all the clandestine things that man has planned to do. Think of this. Here's the creator of the universe, and he's speaking to a bunch of men that he's going to reveal things that no one has ever seen before. They'd been hinted at in the Old Testament, but he's going to put flesh on the bone, if you will. And he says to them, I don't want you keeping any of this stuff to yourself. You go tell this to everyone. So some people look at the term darkness that he uses here as though it's some kind of insider type of a thing. His point is the things that I say to you when no one else is around. Because he's obviously not saying that these are dark things, because if they were, they would stay hidden. They're not to stay hidden because they're not that kind of darkness things. Jesus didn't speak about darkness. Now, The times like this, when he's talking about the things that will be harmful to them, that's kind of dark stuff, that they're going to, deliver you up to be killed and all that. But that's not really, I don't believe, what he's talking about here. It's rather the things that I say to you when no one else is around, when we're just in the room and it's just us, what people would see as darkness or concealed. When you get out and among the people, you make that stuff known. It's not secret. It's not intended to stay secret. So, whatever I tell you in the dark, you speak it in the light. When you're out in the light of day, outside the room, wherever you go, you speak this boldly. And this is why I believe that it's supposed to be just really easy to understand that he's not talking about some insight or dark knowledge and whatnot like that. It's to be known for everyone. So, in the rest of it, it says, and what you hear in the ear, whatever you hear me say, that it's just between us. I want you to go stand on the rooftops and proclaim it to everyone. Preach it. Make sure everyone gets a chance to hear it. If you're on the rooftops, the people who are under you, which is everyone else, everybody can hear it. If everybody's on a rooftop and you're down on the ground, it's harder to hear. So he's just helping them to understand. Go to a place where they can't tune you out. Go to a place where everyone will be able to hear you. That's his point. Go out and be vocal. So he says, and do not fear those, again, the same people that he's talking about, the ones who will make the accusations, the one who will do all those kind of things. Do not fear those who will kill the body. Now he steps it up a little bit. It's more than just resistance. These are people that right here he admits, these are people who could ultimately have the power of life and death over you physically here and now. Here's what he says. So he says, do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. But rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Now, interestingly enough, he's speaking to them in very much Old Testament kind of terms. In New Testament terms, we might look at this a little bit different. And if he was talking to the church, he probably would have used different language because we have a much better understanding of what happens to a person after death and how that all works. So let's remember, what he's putting to them here is who has ultimate authority during life and death and here and now and in the eternal sense. So he says, you have a choice. You can fear man who will make any kind of an accusation and any kind of threat that there is, but their power over you is limited to this life and this life only. What you should do is have an awe and a fear and a respect for the one who governs the eternal soul as well, just as much as the body right here and now. And when he says the one who can destroy, that this is one of the places that people do like to look at if they think, well, hell's not an eternal thing. There's the doctrine of what we call annihilation, and that eventually they'll all just be destroyed. God will just dispense with them. This just simply means brought to ruin. But there are too many other places that tell us that the lake of fire is an eternal place. Hell here and now, as we know it in this world, is where people go awaiting judgment. So if a person dies in absolute rejection of Jesus, they die and they will be in hell, Hades, the grave, Sheol, all those different words that we use, all the different kind of understanding, that they go to a place of holding, but they don't stand before God to be judged until Revelation 20. After the 1,000 years is over, they are resurrected and they die. It's called the second death. They are assigned to the lake of hell that burns forever. So that's their final destination. Hell is not the eternal. Hell is the temporal. The lake of fire is the eternal for all those who have died in rejection of Jesus. For the others who have accepted him, then we're just in his presence in the eternal sense. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around being very temporal, being very earthly, being finite, and just we have a certain amount of years and that's all we get. When we start talking about eternal things, we understand it in principle. We can't possibly understand it mechanically. How does it work? So he goes on to say this in verse 29. And this is really kind of the idea of the value of the disciple. So again, still speaking about disciples. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? And so the idea that sparrows are of no real value to anyone. You can buy them for a copper coin, 2 of them. And so he says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? And not one of them ever falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. And so will, it's not like I want that sparrow to die now. It's rather that it would, without his notice, There's not a single life, even from something like a sparrow, that you never pay attention to, that God is not already aware of, and it doesn't happen without his knowledge and without his permission, if you will. Everything here is very much temporal. This is a kind of an interesting thing when we go to Israel and we get to the Mount of, not the Mount of Olives, but rather the Mount of Beatitudes. And it's one of many possible sites where the Beatitudes could have actually been spoken. We don't know exactly where it is, but this is a good location to kind of demonstrate where something like it could have taken place. More importantly, we've already read it. It's in the Sermon on the Mount. And so it's when you go through the Beatitudes and other parts of it where he starts talking about that consider the birds of the air. They don't toil, they don't spin, but God provides for them. And I always point it out when I read that. I tell everybody to stop for just a moment and say, can you hear? And you'll be able to hear birds everywhere. And then I always ask the group, did you even recognize them before I pointed it out to you? They've been flying around this whole time that we were walking around. We probably haven't even noticed them. But once it's pointed out to you, then you start to see them and you hear their noise. So God provides for them, and he takes notice of them. We don't, because they're just so common. And here Jesus says you can buy 2 of those things for a copper penny, and yet not a single one of them would even fall to the ground, would die without his knowledge. And it is an interesting thing, and it'll probably go along. Maybe I'll make mention of it. But there was something that Benjamin Franklin said, interestingly enough, and I don't quote people very often, but he talked about the country and how during the time of trying to start the nation, they were arguing about everything. And it was after they had won the Revolutionary War. And Franklin had said, when we met here, now I'm paraphrasing, when we met here, every single morning we would start with prayer. And now it seems like we've forgotten the person who has given us this country. He believed that God had done a supernatural thing by giving us the country. And he said, if a sparrow can't fall to the ground without his notice, can a nation rise to prominence or into existence without his assistance? And so he quotes this passage. It's an interesting thing that even a man who had very weird theological views, nothing like mine, knew enough about this and how he could understand that ultimately the power of God is so much grander than anything that we could, kind of put ideas to. So here he quotes this passage, but it is really for us to understand the things that we wouldn't even necessarily pay attention to. They're just not even on our radar. God is intimately involved and knows them in complete understanding. So he goes on and he says this, but the very hairs of your head are numbered. So do not fear, therefore, you are more valuable than many sparrows. So I send you out as wolves, or as sheep among wolves, and there's these people are going to do these things to you, but there's a great value that you have to the Father, and I want you to understand that. You may go through very difficult things, and that might even be something that you question, but never question your value to the Father. Though we are sinners, we are failures, we make all kinds of mistakes, nonetheless, you have incredible value as far as the Father's concerned. And if you ever doubt that, remember the person who is saying these things went to the cross because that's what it cost to save you. Let that sink in. So the very same person who would go to the cross was telling them and us down through the generations that you have a value before the Lord that we can't fully grasp. And if ever we doubt that, consider the person who is saying these words is the one who was going to go to the cross and sacrifice himself as an offering before God for your sin and for mine. So you're more valuable than many sparrows. Now in verses 32 and 33, this is kind of the idea of relationship. And this is something that's mocked a lot in our world today by people who kind of just, turn their noses up at the idea of the accepting of Jesus. And, again, there's a lot of cliches that the church uses that you have to accept Jesus in your heart. And one of the pushbacks that we get from people all the time is, well, there's not a single place in the Bible that says you have to accept Jesus in your heart. Okay. You can make the case for it, and it's shown pretty clearly. Here's one of those places, the idea of acceptance and rejection, and when it comes to the person of Jesus. And it's obviously a matter of the heart, because it's the heart that accepts such things. We don't come to Jesus because it's some intellectual pursuit. It's because the heart leads us to the place of saying he loved us enough that he would do this. I accept what he offers to me, and we do so. The Bible tells us it's the love of God that leads a man to repentance, and repentance is of the heart. It's not of the intellect. It's not of the mind, though they're active. It's not a problem. But ultimately, this becomes a matter of the heart. It's what the being of the person comes to that recognition of crying out to God because of their desperate, desperate need of forgiveness. So he goes to that part here as far as understanding who Jesus is, and he's offered to them as an offering, and that's what's being spoken of here. So we're going to see three different things that are mentioned here in verses 30. Let's see, verses 32 and 33. There are three things that are mentioned here. There is the confession, there's the denial, and the receiving. So the three work together. The two are opposites, and that'll make sense here in a moment. Verse 32 says this, "Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, that person or him will I confess before my Father who is in heaven." That's man or woman alike. It says he, but it's he or she. Now the second part of that, "But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven." So you'll get to the receiving part of this as we go on a little bit further, because there's a real important part of this. Now, the first part of this is the idea of the confession. And so if a person will confess the Lord, now that's in his own heart and mind, his or her own heart and mind. It's that recognition of who Jesus is, what he did, what he claimed, and my responsibility to him for his offer. So when he offers himself for me at the cross and he sheds his blood for my sin, I'm left with a decision. Do I accept and do I believe? And if so, I will make confession of that. I will say that. I will address it that way, and I will make him known the same way. I will proclaim those things. The confession is the proclamation. And again, it starts in the mind, but it's verbalized, not a problem. We find that the word for confession here is something that's said outwardly. So if you will confess me, so not the confessing of sins or any particular thing, it's the confession of who he is. I believe in Jesus because of who he is and what he said and what he did and what he accomplished, and making the promises and then making good on the promises. I believe in it all. That's the confession. And so a person who will do that, when they stand before God and Jesus is there as the advocate, would say, this is a person who never denied me. And it's not as though the Father's sitting there going, I didn't know that. Of course he knows that. The point is that Jesus stands and he will testify that this is one of mine. As we have testified of him, he would testify of us reciprocally. So the idea that we could say, I confess, I proclaim, I will say to anyone who hears, I believe in the person of Jesus and what he accomplished and his promises that he made to me. I accept, I believe, I confess these things. I'll let anybody know that wants to hear. So, if you will confess me before men, I will confess before my Father who is in heaven. So that you claim me, I will claim you. Now, but whoever denies me, and the denial is offered. So remember Jesus again, here is what's being in the first verse, it's what's being confessed. Jesus, the one that we believe in, the one that went to the cross, the Savior of my soul, the lover of my soul, the creator of all things, is my Savior and my Lord. That's my confession. Now, I would offer that to someone else. You can have him too. I would love for you to know who he is. You can ask him to forgive you of your sins. You can receive him. You can receive what he has done for you. You can accept the gift of forgiveness that he offers to you freely. You offer it as an invitation. Here it is, you can have it. Well, here it says, but the person who denies me, and that's the idea of just rejection, the outstretched hand that Jesus offers to those people. If it is turned back and rejected, that's the denial that's being spoken of here. But whoever denies me before men, him I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. And think of that where they said, Jesus, we already looked at it in past weeks, what about those people that will come to him at that day and say, Lord, Lord, didn't we? And, the idea of casting out demons and healing and doing all that stuff. It's like, yeah, you did a bunch of stuff in my name, but I never knew you. You never knew me, I never knew you. You dropped my name because there's an authority in it, but there was no relationship with us. So once again, that idea of relationship, which is also mocked just as much as the idea of asking him into your heart, because it's a cliche, the same thing. It's the invitation, the accepting of him. And so here it's pretty clearly spelled out that there is that idea that Jesus offers himself and he can be rejected by some and accepted by others. So John 1, 11 and 12, same thing, that the ones who denied him, fine. The ones who accepted him, he gave them the right to be numbered among the children of God. So the idea that the ones who are denied, they also, like he says, I never knew you. There was no relationship there. So for us to be able to say we have a relationship with Jesus Christ, absolutely provable by the text, but unfortunately it's a bumper sticker that people love to mock. This is why we should be able to speak beyond bumper stickers, even if we quote them. If we were to say, we all seen the bumper stickers if we're old enough, I don't have a religion, I have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Completely true. Completely valid statement. It's wonderful, but explain the bumper sticker, because other than that, it just sounds like a bumper sticker. Be able to explain what that is. And, you know, obviously you would know how to do it. If you're a Bible believer, you know exactly how to do that. I'm not a religious person. I don't wear robes. I don't do everything trying to earn my way to heaven. I have a relationship with the one who has already given me heaven as a free gift. It's an offer that he's made to me. I don't try to reach out to him. He reached out to me. I follow. So, verses 34 to 36. This is going on with that belief, the objection, the rejection, all the rest. So do not think that I have come to bring peace. He's working with what he has just said there, and this is picking up on something that he said before, that there is going to be division because of him. And I came quoted from this last week because it goes along with the other thing about, you know, the feuds that there will be in the families. So he says, do not think that I came to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword, that idea of division. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And he's quoting from Micah chapter 7, verse 6. Now, if you go read Micah 7, verse 6, it's not a messianic, it's not a prophecy about Jesus. It's about the things that would happen and the division that would come of those people who would reject the things of God and those who would not. It's going to be a dividing kind of a thing of the unrighteous and the righteous. Well, same kind of a thing here. And he's using this as a way of saying, as it was that Micah was discussing, it's the same with me. The people who will accept, the people who will deny, the people who will confess, the people who will not confess. So it's going to be something that would divide, and it will even cut through a house. Mother, father, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, whatever relationship there is within a home. That's why he's not trying to say, well, what about this? What about a daughter-in-law with a father-in-law? It's not the nuance of this. It's the way of saying that even in the family structure, you might have a division right down the middle of the house from one person to the next when you put Jesus into the equation. So this is what God ends up doing. The God of the Bible does this. There are gods that are presented to us through other religions where everything is cool. Let's just get along, kumbaya. There's no responsibility that we have that we will stand before God someday and have to give account. As far as the God of the Bible is concerned, that is exactly what will take place. And when we start to think of him like that, and you start to preach him that way, you're going to cause division. And if it's in your own house, many of us have experienced that. It's very divisive to say, I believe this, and if you know what's good for you, you would believe it as well. Let me help you to understand. I'll show you what God showed me. Man, you're going to split families apart by doing so. So he says, I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be those of his own household. And he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And that really sets some people on edge. They just cannot wrap their mind around Jesus saying something like that. Now, if we fully understand what he's talking about, then we really can see, yeah, but if I love him above all other things, I understand love, what it looks like in a much better understanding, so I can love my relatives in a much better way. So for me to be able to say, I love Jesus more than my wife, to her, that's a good thing. Because if I love Jesus because he loves me, he will teach me what love looks like, and I'll have a much better way of demonstrating that to my wife. Paul picks that up starting at verse 22 or 23 of Ephesians 5. So the idea of a husband loving a wife as Jesus loved the church. So when I look to him, I don't have a problem saying I love him above all others. And because of that, he has demonstrated to me and helped me to understand love in ways I would otherwise not understand. Therefore, I can be a better husband because I can love my wife in a way that I wouldn't otherwise. Same thing with my child, my grandkids, my family, my friends, across the board. Mankind, I look at them completely different after being born again because now my eyes are open to it. So we've watched this take place as far as the division. Now he gets to this part of saying, love me above all other things, and you'll be able to deal with those kind of contentions. And you'll be better able. So have your priorities here. So then we read in verse 39, kind of verse 38, going along the same lines. It says, now he who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. That's on a day-to-day basis. And so the idea of taking up the cross, what an interesting thing that he would say. So even to them at the time, now if he said this post-resurrection, okay, that makes sense. I watched him carry his cross, now I get it. He's not carrying a cross right now. He won't carry a cross until the last hours of his life, and he will be put to death on it. Now, it was something that a Roman was understood as far as Romans were concerned. People were being crucified all the time. But Jesus had not yet even started speaking about such things. But he talks about taking up the cross. So what he ended up doing and was actually shown to them, they understood. It was a humiliating thing for a person that was going to be put to death on a cross. They were going to carry it to the cross, to the place of their death. So the very implement that they would be put to death on, that cross, is something they would have to carry. It wasn't provided for him. It wasn't already in place. He had to drag it there, which is just an ultimate humiliation of the person and completely dehumanizing. So here Jesus says, take up your cross daily as I do. So though you're not, the old saying, the dead man walking, which is really kind of an interesting thing Paul picks up on, that when you're seeing me, you're looking at me, my paraphrase, you look at me, you look at a dead man. I'm dead to the things of this world. They don't have power over me any longer. He understood that idea. I carry my cross as a dead person walking. I'll do what God has asked me to do, but the day will come when my life will be surrendered, and that'll be the end of it. And so Paul didn't die on a cross. Jesus did. History tells us that Peter did as well, potentially. But no matter what, what he's saying to them is not as much the idea of the cross, but what it symbolized to them as people under the thumb of Rome, and how people would be put to death and the humiliation of it. So are you willing to do this? This is the cost of discipleship. Will you pick up your cross and follow me daily? And that's a pretty heavy thing, because he says if you're not willing to do it, then you're not worthy of me. Heavy stuff. So again, we read that and think, what's our cross and what's the cost for us to do that? Because to them, they would go, oh, I get it. That's the Romans. And if I'm going to carry the cross, I'm a dead man walking. Well, we don't have to worry about that same world, not if we're here in the West. There are places on the planet, though. You're basically doing that. You come to Jesus and you believe in him, depending on where you are in the world, you are basically a dead man walking. You are carrying your cross because it's a death sentence if they find you. Heavy, heavy stuff. So verse 39, so he who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. So pretty easy to see. It's that idea of what do you value? What are the things that you put stake in? And so a person who is trying to do all of these things is looking in the wrong direction. They're not looking to him, they're looking to self. Again, it's the cost of discipleship. So anybody who's looking to do it for themselves, they're going to find that it brings them just simply to ruin. And then you see in verses 40 to 42, it kind of ends this up, and it's the recognition going along with, if you go into a city and they receive you, great. If not, then, wipe the dust off your feet. It's basically the same thing. Because he says in verse 40, he who receives you. Now, let's remember what I had mentioned about accepting and receiving and denying and all that. When you look in verse 33, where it says about the one who denies, there's an offer extended to them. The hand is outstretched. Here's the offer. And if they say, I don't want it, then the hand is brought back. That's fine. You're in a place of rejection. You deny those things. You don't want anything to do with them. You reject them. Here, it's the complete opposite. To that same hand extended, These are the people that would receive it or accept it. So, he who receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. This is that closing of the loop, if you will, that he had never talked about the time when he and the Father were not one, but this really pushes us forward in time, and we can read the prayer that he makes. If you want to know what the Lord's Prayer is, it's found in John 17. It's where he's praying for the disciples, and interestingly enough, down through the ages, those who would come to believe in him because of their testimony. I think it's verse 21 of John 17. So when he says that, they're to understand that this idea of Jesus and who he represents and what he's about. In verse 40, he's the one who offers himself to those people, and that would be their message. Remember, you're supposed to go out as wolves or as sheep among the wolves, and you're to go to the lost house of Israel, and you're to tell them that the kingdom of God is at hand. That's the extending of the hand. Here's the message. You go tell them the good news. Here's what is there for them. This is what they can embrace. So the other ones he's already mentioned, verse 33, there will be those who will deny the outstretched hands. The ones who would take him by the hand and say, I accept, I receive, thank you, that gratitude that's there. And that's really the beginning of discipleship. The people that step into that relationship with him have accepted that outstretched hand, and the rest of their lives will be spent learning more about what that means. The most elemental part of a believer is to say, yes, Lord, forgive me. I accept your offering for my sin. And the rest of our time, we then become devotees of his, doulos, the bondservants, willfully giving ourselves to him, the one who purchased us with his own blood. And so we disciple, we learn, we grow under our teacher. He's the one who reveals truth to us. So, he who receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me, the Father. So what a wonderful thing. Again, if we're trying to see how it works in operationally, think of the Lord, what he says. As he's praying to the Lord, he then brings the disciples and us by extension into that inner part, that we would all be one, using his words, that we would be one. So that idea that we'll never be God, but we are accepted as the ones, like it was with Adam. Adam was created, but he had direct, immediate, face-to-face fellowship with the God who created him. So we will as well. Jesus has never been disconnected from the Father, before or after, or even when he was on the earth here. Physically, he was here in human form, but his fellowship with the Father was never broken. So it is here, when we're gathered to him at the end of our lives, or at the rapture of the church, we will be with him forever, accepted as part of the kingdom of God and as his children. So that idea of oneness, the inseparable bond that there is between the Creator and his beloved. So then verse 41 and 42 goes through a few different things. And it's, again, remember when he had said to them, when you go into a city or you go into a home and they receive you, then let your blessing be upon it. Let your peace be there. And there's going to be a blessing that's going to be coming to that house. So think of what happened when they were bringing the ark and they had it on a cart during David's time, and it shouldn't have been so. And it slipped, and was it Uriah? Uzziah, which one? Yeah, Uzziah, I think, goes to steady it on the cart, and he touched the ark. He's not a Levite, shouldn't have done it. And he touched it, and he died. And David was enraged. He just tried to keep that thing from falling, and God, you struck him down, and David really had a problem with it. If David had looked at it, he would have looked in a mirror and said, my fault. I killed that man because it should have been Levites carrying that thing on the poles like it's supposed to be. God said, do it this way or else. And the or else was learned the hard way. And it wasn't his problem. So David has it stay in a man's house in a different place, and that man's life prospered. So God, this man received the Ark of the Covenant that God had made, and he didn't, seemingly no reluctance to it, but everything he touched, just God blessed it. So there is this idea, again, of receiving in those people. Jesus makes this promise that if this is the case, that they're going to know who you are when you go into these places, and there's going to be a blessing for them because God is going to see to it. He will return their hospitality. He won't be a debtor to them, verse 41. He who receives a prophet, or a prophet is just one who proclaims what God has sent them to do. An apostle could be a prophet who is also a disciple. So I'm using all these terms that get thrown around so often. Here's how a disciple could be an apostle and a prophet. He starts out as a disciple. I'm a believer in Jesus. He is my master. He's my teacher. He's my rabbi. Great. He has tasked me and sent me out to go and proclaim the gospel. And now what I'm telling the people is what he has sent me to tell them. So disciple, apostle, prophet. And so the idea that today, and I've said it recently, the idea of apostles and prophets just make me want to gag when I see them on TV or see them on whatever medium I might see it, social media and everything else. Think about it this way. We can do the exact same things without claiming some specific office. If you're a disciple, a devotee of Jesus, and one who sits under him as their teacher, and he has sent you out into the world as ambassadors for Jesus Christ, you're an apostle. You're one who is sent, and you're going to proclaim what it is that he has shown you and taught you in his word. You're then doing the work of a prophet, the one that he is sent to proclaim. Easy to understand. I don't have to go around telling people that I'm a prophet and an apostle. I just need to say I'm a disciple of Jesus, and I'll go wherever he sends me, and I'll say whatever he asks me to say. I don't have to play the games with the titles. I don't need people to kiss my ring. I don't need people to bow down to me or think that somehow I'm greater than they are. We're all the same people doing the exact same thing if we're being obedient to him. So he uses different people in different ways at different times for reasons that he decides to do it, when he decides to do it. We are all subject to him at any one time. He is sovereign. We are the servants. We are not greater than our master. So we don't tell him when he's going to do this, that, or the other thing on his or on our terms. Everything is just us being available to him at his call. Period. End of story. No more to be discussed. Now, somebody may hear this and believe in prophets and apostles, and they can go back and start listening to those guys all again. That's fine, do it. But there's no biblical justification for any of those guys carrying some kind of title that's greater than anybody else. So he says, whoever receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. So the idea that there would be blessing that goes along with the one that God has sent to say the things that they say. The people who would receive them in, God is going to bless those people because they have not rejected the message. They've embraced the message. The prophet is the one who is speaking forth those things. If the person is going to say, please come and stay with us, and we'll give you a door and a way to come in, and you can be a part of our home and go and do what God has asked you to do, we'll embrace that. You're one of us. God's going to say, I'm going to bless that house because they're participating in the work. So they may not be the ones that God sends out, but they're willing to take care of the needs of the person that God is sending. So God's body is so much greater than any one particular person or any one particular office. It all works together. And a body without all of the pieces functioning fails. So he goes on and says this, and one who receives a righteous man, or a person that's right before God. However it is that they're doing what they're doing, and a righteous person could be the one that God sends as the prophet. It could be speaking of the same person. Jesus isn't trying to get us to say, well, what's the difference between the righteous person and who are they, and who's the prophet and what are they? It's not about that. It's about the idea that if God's going to send us out to do the things that we do, and the people are going to receive us in and accept the things that we're saying and doing and want to be a part of it, God is going to make sure that he blesses them as well. However that may be, whether it's monetary, whether it's in some other way, they're not going to be in a place of being indebted because they had opened their hearts and their minds and their doors to the Lord and to those who he sent. So that's all that's being said here. He who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones only a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple, assuredly I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. So even the most seemingly innocuous things, they're just not all that important. But the idea of cold water, somebody pointed this out, I thought was interesting. You can have water sitting around and it's going to be room temperature. If you're going to give them cold water, it means you're going to go draw it from a well. And so there's questions about who are these that are being spoken of, because Jesus doesn't gesture. We don't know if there's children around or what the case may be. Is he saying these as the ones that go out, the ones that are like the righteous person, or the, are there people around that he's pointing to and saying, if people will receive the prophet, or if they'll receive the disciple, the righteous man, or whatever else, or if they will give assistance to those people, however it may be, just know that there's nothing about those people receiving them in and taking care of even the most basic of needs. God will notice it. Because it's the same God who notices that even the sparrow that falls to the ground, it doesn't happen without his knowledge. So much care does he have about the day-to-day of creation that he can count the number of hairs on your head. So there's nothing that's hidden from him. There's nothing that he does not know. There's nothing that happens that somebody could bring a report and say, God, did you know that this happened yesterday? And expect him to say, no, I hadn't noticed that. Of course not. He knows all these things. It's completely known to him at all times. So fascinating, fascinating stuff. Sending us out as disciples into a world, and whether they receive or not, this is all stuff that we can say, some of that may never actually transpire in its worst configuration. I may not find myself in a place of having to fear for my life and all the rest of the things like they did, but I can understand the idea of the places that about accepting and rejecting, the idea of confessing his name, recognizing that we're no greater than our master. There are plenty of things in here that we can say, I have no problems being a believer in the United States in the 21st century. I see this stuff happens all the time. The division that he brings, sometimes people will become just incensed that you bring up his name. That stuff we probably all get a chance to experience. The idea of being fearful of people who could possibly put you to death because of what you believe, that's different for people in some parts of the world than it is for us here in the West. So you can see places where there's not a perfect illustration in the day-to-day life of the believer here and now, unless you live in a particular part of the world. But the big picture we absolutely get. That's not hard for us to grasp and to understand. But he just says some very, very important things about discipleship and the cost of it. So being familiar with what he teaches here is vital to us, and just so useful, so important for us to grasp. Now, as we conclude today, once again, looking at the world as we see it, and I've been a believer now, I'm in my 40th year as a believer. And so I'm not one of those people that could tell you the day that it happened, but I know the year. I know where I was at the end of 1985 into the beginning of 1986. Gosh, we're getting really close to it. We're only actually 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks from when I proposed to my wife 40 years ago. Oh my gosh. So the idea of being a believer for that length of time, I've been a believer for over 40 years. And yet I see the world in a place of trouble like I've never seen it before. And so not talking about war, but just the mentality of people. And first of all, the rejection of God in day-to-day life is like we've not seen it before. But the anger and the fury and the violence and the hatred is unlike what we've seen before. The rejection of God for just what should be obvious things when it comes to the idea of gender and the assignment of gender and all that kind of stuff. And even we were hearing this debated in the Supreme Court last week, I think, that you have some of them that are so beholden to it that some of the Supreme Court justices won't even believe that you can say a person's a male and a person's a female and the DNA doesn't lie. There's no way around it. They're still trying to act as though it's not a biological, but it's a psychological thing. And who would have ever thought that we would be in the place where the Supreme Court would have to debate something so obvious? But such is the idea of the rebellion of mankind and how it just seems to know no limits. So when I look at that, or I watched the reactions that there were when the president spoke at Davos, and the reaction, and it was intended to just, you could see he said things because he knew that it would have a reaction. But it's an interesting thing, and people a lot of times don't get it here. I'll just speak very, very briefly on the political stuff. With the current administration, the way that it is, he doesn't try to do things like a politician, and that really bothers some people. A politician is going to try to measure every single word, and they're worried about what the reaction of people is going to be, so you never really get an idea just what it is that they believe, because they're concealing it. They're not going to come right out and say it. Our president, love him or hate him, You always know where he stands, and he says whatever's on his mind. He's not a politician. He's not worried about the next election cycle. He's not worried about his legacy. He's going to go back to private life after 2028. He'll probably have plenty to say, but he's going to go back to being the developer guy. So that's what's just so different about him than most politicians that we're used to, because most of the guys, by the time that they reach the presidency, have been in politics all their lives, and it's all that they know. So they're always playing to an audience. And so does he play to an audience? You better believe he does, but not for political reasons like some of these other ones do. But what that ends up doing is it creates in people a fury and a rage like I've never seen before. So all the stuff that we find happening about immigration and deportations and all that stuff, the same people who are so enraged and just are losing their mind about this stuff don't even realize that the past presidents had been deporting people by the millions, and you never heard anybody talk about it. But this is all going to just this idea that there is such a rage among the people like I've not seen before, but we also see so many of the other things that Jesus told us would be kind of precursors to what will be ultimately the tribulation. We see it, and we'll get to it in Matthew 24 when we get there weeks from now. So ultimately, the world will be in a place of turmoil, and it will have to be different somehow, some way than what we've seen all along. Because there's always been these things. The idea of wars and rumors of wars and false prophets and all that stuff, they've been with us forever. But there's something about what Jesus talks about there, because it's going to have to be different, because he makes mention of it before the return of the Lord, before the day of the Lord. So as we kind of work our minds through and are working through that, looking at the world around us, do we expect that it would be going in the wrong direction as we get closer to his return? There is a large element of the church who believes totally different from that. They believe that what we are here to do is to make Jesus known, however they say that's supposed to be done, and we'll find that it will ultimately help to usher in the kingdom of God because of the work that we do in the world. So all that they should be able to do to test their theory is to say, let's look at the scoreboard and see how we're doing. So the world is really moving further and further away from any resemblance of a godly people, if it ever had it in whatever extent that it did. In our country, there was definitely a time when the general population was much more careful about the things that we would think, even if they didn't go to church every week or anything else, the way that they conducted their lives was much more in a biblical sense than what we see currently. Now it's almost vogue for a couple of things, either to be completely rejecting of anything biblical, or the ones who want to try to play both sides of it, to claim to be a Christian, because we're reading the stories, you probably have, of these people that are, quote, turning to religion, and then you start to read the details of the stories, and they're playing around the edges. It's not that they've dedicated themselves to the systematic study of God's Word and learning who He is, but they're identifying with whatever product is being sold. So most of the churches we see around us today is more just kind of the consumer grade, let's identify with Christianity, but they have no idea what it is that they ultimately believe. And if you don't believe me, take a look at any of you in wherever it is that you live. Go and look at the 3 biggest churches and go watch one of the Bible studies or one of the church services, and you tell me what you're finding of value in the things that are being spoken of over the pulpit. And I'll show you a church that's going through the motions. So the very big churches, by and large, and of course I can't broad brush it all, but much of what we see in modern Western Christianity couldn't survive if we were being persecuted. The church that would go underground would be a very small portion of that, but most of them would fold. People would say, I didn't sign up for this problem, but that's what it's like in most of the rest of the world. So it's just an interesting time to be alive, and I do definitely see that it's a time when we're going to be just seeing more and more division. Right here, Jesus tells us that there would be division when we bring His name, but I'm seeing division just because of even political decisions. So there's this interesting thing that we find. It's a dynamic in the church, and we'll conclude with this. The church, there are some in the church that believe that the church should be very, very involved in every single aspect of politics and every bit of what the world is about. And if we will just infiltrate those parts of the church, some call it 7 mountains, but just the mentality behind it, forget what the labels are. Just the idea that the church, if it could just get involved in all these different things, would somehow be able to change the trajectory. And so you will find people that will really advocate for those kind of things. If it's just one more election cycle, if we just get these people elected, we can turn the tide a different way. I'm personally one of those people who does not just disengage when it comes to political things. I'm very involved with that, as you all know, those of you that have been around for any length of time. But I don't believe that we're one election cycle away from things getting better. We are definitely one election cycle away from things getting much worse. Ask the people that are in, say, Virginia or New Jersey. They're about to find out, or New York City. But things can go very, very wrong in one generation or one election cycle. The best that you can hope for is to stop the bleeding in one particular election cycle. But we're on a trajectory that's not going to get any better, I don't believe, because the rest of the world is in the same direction. And I expect to see all of that upheaval in the world before the Lord returns. So when he says that when the Son of Man returns, Jesus says, will he find faith on the earth? We've looked at that passage before. So what is it that is the call to the Christian? Jesus says a very interesting thing, also quoting it from chapter 17. Read the whole prayer. But John 17 tells us where Jesus mentions that we are of this world, but we are not, or we're in this world rather, but we're not of this world. And there is a big difference. We live in this world. We're not supposed to disengage from this world or only partially engage. That's why I don't believe that if God's given us a voice that we don't use it in everything, in our vote, in our our political view, and in making him known that way and in every particular way. I don't think he calls us to engage in some things and disengage in others. So we're in this world, and if he's put us in it with whatever we're able to do, we should affect it in any way that we can. So in this world, but we're not of it. It is not our home in a permanent sense. It is just a place in which we are traveling. So for us here, as we watch these things going down, it's a broken, irreparably broken world. It's not going to get better. If we believe, as I think I see and read from the scriptures, I don't expect it to get any better. Not until he brings it to an end. Because, again, the tribulation is not a time of revival among the church. It's not a time of revival among the world, as far as the world is concerned. It will be a drawing of a remnant of Israel back to the Lord in those days under terrible, terrible persecution, but the world is then being judged at the tribulation. And to think that everything is just wonderful before that happens, you're not reading the text. The text just shows that the run-up to it, remember when Jesus talked about wars, rumors of wars, famine, pestilence, he said these are the beginnings of sorrow. So all of that run-up that's there is just, there's going to be a lot of stuff well before the tribulation. It's just moving in that direction. So I look at the world, and when I see it melt down, I can be shocked by what I see with my eyes, but I'm not surprised. It's something that I expect, but it's really weird when you actually see it. There's a difference between those two things. So for us, we are in this world, we're not of this world. We may be shocked by the things that we see, but we are not surprised because we expect them to be so. And if you put any kind of real hope in the institutions of man or the things of this world, you're looking in the wrong direction. This is a fallen, broken creation that is really starting to move to an end and a culmination of things as we understand them, I believe, as I look at the Bible. Definitely this world is different than when I first got saved. I got saved in the mid-'80s. Yeah, there was all kinds of just, the indulgences of people, but it was different then. The way that people conducted themselves, the stuff that they would believe about the most basic of element things. Again, probably the one that is so easy for us to track because we see it everywhere is the idea that people can identify as whatever they want to, and who cares what biology says. They will deny that, and they will be the ones who tell us that we have to accept what it is that they're saying. And in some places around the world, if you deny that, you can be prosecuted. So we're moving into uncharted territory, I believe, but it tells me where we are in the lateness of the days. It's a fallen creation. It's broken, irreparably so. So I don't expect things to get any better. And so as long as we're here, take the opportunity that he puts before you, walk with him in a place of integrity, make him known, and do so in a way unapologetically, and it may even come at a cost of doing it. But we've just read that's precisely what we could expect as we read through what I've just said in Matthew chapter 10. If you're hearing this as just a reel or a short, we've just finished up with chapter 10, where Jesus says, I send you out as sheep among wolves. And he talks about the price that it may cost of discipleship. It's all of chapter 10 in the Gospel of Matthew. And so I do pray that you are blessed when you hear these things, again, helping us to understand where we are in time, not to be fearful, but eyes wide open, as he's already told us, to be wise as serpent, but harmless as doves in this world that increasingly grows further and further distant from him and colder to him by the day. So we will pick up at chapter 11 next week in the Gospel of Matthew. If you have any questions on any of what I've shared, want to talk to me about the Israel trip, you can contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net, and I'd love to hear from you. You can do so through the email that's there, and I'd love to discuss any of these topics with you. So we'll see you next Thursday for chapter 11.